Hello everyone and welcome to the first of hopefully many videos in Legion, and I will start with a guide on my main character for the past two expansions, the Holy Paladin. As the name of the video suggests, it is a beginner guide, but I would argue that we are all beginners in this new expansion, especially when it comes to classes, as there has never been this much change thrown at them in just one transition between expansions. Now, even though raids aren't out yet, I will still speculate on the matter, while the majority of the video will be focused on general and dungeon gameplay. However, if the information for the raids isn't quite correct, I will make a short update when the first raid actually comes out. Before we go into specifics, I will shortly explain what my thoughts on the spec are so far. In terms of reliability, it made a complete 180 from Warlords, where it was the most reliable healer of them all, especially for tank healing and single target healing. I say this because of its reliance on either procs or its lack of mana, depending on which build you are using. That said, it's the only flaw I could find so far. That just means that some other healer will be the reliable one from now on. Now, the major benefit of having a Holy Paladin in your raid group is its incredible ability to adapt to any given situation. This is made possible by our talent tree, and of course this is true for every healer, but not to this extent. On that note, there are two main builds, a melee and ranged one, and then there are a lot of variations on both, but in this video I'll be talking about the three best ones. So one melee build and one ranged build are good in any scenario, and one ranged is specifically for dungeons. It basically renders the dungeons easy to complete. Now on to specifics. The spec is designed around its mastery. Thankfully, it's more interesting than most specs. It increases the healing you do the closer you are to the target. And because you aren't going to be close to all targets at all times to heal them properly, there are a few talents to help you and increase the potency of your mastery. So keep that in mind while watching this guide. For all Holy Paladins, the change from Warlords will be staggering. Not only because they removed and introduced some spells, but because we only used 2 or 3 spells to heal with in the last year, because that was the most effective gameplay. Now, before going into the talents, here is an overview on the base spells we have and how best to use them. First, Holy Light and Flash of Light. So far, Holy Light is the least used spell in my arsenal. Using Flash of Light in any situation is better for the faster cast speed. I also prefer to use it with the Infusion of Light proc, as it gives a 50% healing buff. In raids, however, where mana will be an issue, Holy Light is set up to be the filler spell, but used only with the proc, and more on why that is later. Holy Shock generally used on cooldown, as it heals only 25% less than Flash of Light, but also costs 6% less mana and is instant. It also has a number of passives to make it a priority cast whenever it is available. Light of the Martyr. Now, this is one of the new spells and it's really interesting. It's similar to Holy Shock, but with a risk-reward system. It has no cooldown, so you can spam it, unlike Holy Shock. But beside costing less mana than Holy Shock, it sacrifices health equal to 50% of the heal. Now, this is really important. 50% of the heal. In the pre-patch, there were situations where I died because of it, primarily when I had wings and the ring popped. The damage it would deal was immense, since the initial heal was so strong because of the buffs. This is not the case at the moment, but it will be the case once we get more gear and invest more into our artifact, with of course maybe some set bonuses at later on. The way to combat this not dying while you have your cooldowns up is to use Divine Shield. Now, you get 0 damage while healing a huge amount with wings, so you get all the benefit and none of the cost, but of course you do blow a lot of cooldowns in the process, but there always comes a time where blowing those cooldowns is still beneficial. I do this from time to time and it is a really great stabilizer. You just have to take care afterwards not to need those cooldowns. Light of Dawn. The only AoE ability we have, and in its base form has a high cooldown time to be a reliable heal. Plus, it doesn't heal for much without a lot of passives behind it. Of course, I mean the passives in the artifact tree. Lastly, the artifact ability Tears Deliverance. At first I didn't really get how this spell is supposed to work. It is on a huge 1.5 minute cooldown and has a really confusing mechanic. When you cast it, it heals an injured ally, so they don't have to be in your group. Note, it doesn't say the most injured party member, so it's not supposed to be a smart heal, just an like AoE or cleave heal. When I used it, however, it always healed the most injured party member. So I don't know if it's worded wrong or if I just had good RNG. Anyway, when it heals, it leaves a 10-second buff which increases the amount of healing received from Holy Light and Flashlight by 20%. The major downside is that it only has a 15-yard range, so if you want to effectively heal someone with this ability, you need to stand really close to them. The real problem with it, however, is if it only healed one player over the course of the 10 seconds it heals, it would actually heal for a lot. So outside of the dungeons where tanks get most of the damage, so they get most of the heal, it again isn't a reliable heal. We're back to that unreliability. For dungeons, if you are close enough to the tank and use this ability, basically no one can die for those 10 seconds as long as you use other abilities while it does its thing. So for small groups it's a perfect stabilizer. And that is it basically when it comes to the baseline heals. We of course have DPS abilities and a good number of utility ones, but we'll get into that in just a second. The gameplay isn't really apparent with just these spells. That is largely to do with what I said earlier. The way you spec into your talent tree is the way you will play your class. The difference in gameplay with changing just one tier of talents is huge. Far more than ever before. So I will go over the best builds and for what parts of the game they are used for. Before that, just to mention the DPS. Without the right talents, they are just that, DPS abilities, with no base passives linked to them. The only thing to note is that you can absolutely make them matter by killing weak mobs and adds during raid fights. Crusader Strike combined with Judgement does a lot of burst damage every 8 seconds, so consider using them on adds that have to be killed fast, even without any passive benefit to your healing. And if you have a global cooldown to spend, you can also use Consecrate for some small AoE damage. Now on to the good stuff. In the first tier, my default in the beta and the pre-patch versions of the game was Crusader's Might, just because in my mind this spec is designed to be played as a melee healer, or that's at least what I thought back then. And if that was the case, why would you not take a passive that reduces the cooldown of your main healing spells Holy Shock and Light of Dawn? At the moment though, for dungeons, the best one by far is Bestow Faith, for two major reasons. The majority of the healing you will do in any dungeon will be on the tank, and the tank is going to be taking damage like 99% of the time. So you can't really waste the spell as you would in a raid, where other healers might heal that target that you placed the overtime heal on. So yeah, you would basically overheal every single time with that spell in a raid. Now back to dungeons, it also works well with the final talent Beacon of Virtue. So let's talk about that spell, since it actually is the core of this first build. Of course, for raids, Light's Hammer will be good in raid fights where a lot of people have to stack, and Crusader's Might is just generally better than the other two if there is no or little stacking going on. So Beacon of Virtue. It has changed significantly from Warlords and is perfect for dungeons. If you take it, you lose the original Beacon, and with it goes the also powerful tank healing. That is the only downside, but the multiple upsides are you can heal the entire group of 5 with single target heals on one target. You can combo it with Bestow Faith, the previous spell, and it has a relatively short cooldown. If in an ideal dungeon run you used it on cooldown, you can have it up on the entire group 50% of the time. That of course won't ever happen, but you can get it close, and basically I had it whenever I needed to do some AoE healing. So there is an optimal way to use it, and this is it. As soon as it's needed, so that's when more than 2 people have taken damage, you put Bestow Faith on the player with the lowest HP, then start casting Flash of Light, and as soon as you pull the cast off, your character casts the Beacon. Now I'm not sure if this is meant to happen, but the Flash of Light actually heals everyone even if it's cast before the Beacon. This of course means that you have to spam the button on which your Beacon is before the cast of the Flash of Light finishes. That way you get 2 good AoE heals instead of 2 single target heals. From there you just focus the lowest HP player with the rest of your heals until the buff wears off. This is of course because the most injured player gets the full 100% of the heal, while everyone else gets 40%. It's not like it's brain dead gameplay, say you cast the Beacon and heal whoever you want. You actually have to do, yeah, it's minimum thought put into, but you actually have to do some stuff. So this spell and this build is by far the optimal one for dungeons. But be aware that your tank is going to have a harder time without the normal Beacon. That just means that you have to heal him more than usual and he needs to up his game a bit. As for raiding, I doubt it will be useful, especially in mythics where 20 men is required, and basically any groups larger than 10. Then of course you pick Beacon of the Lightbringer. This allows the creation of other builds, as it basically makes the requirement to be in melee, because of the multiple passives you have, not an actual requirement anymore. Just remember to put that Beacon with that passive, Lightbringer, on a target opposite to where you are standing. So for instance, if you are in the melee, DPSing, and you are using a build with Crusader's Might, as unusual as it might be, it's better if you put the Beacon on a ranged target, preferably a healer, so you can heal them just as good as the melee, and vice versa. Now back to the top. Rule of Law is the only healing increase here, so it should be a default pick. In the crowd control tree, if you don't find yourself using Judgement much, then I guess Blinding Light is better. Okay, the Aura tier is really important. I always go with Devotion Aura, that's my default pick, as it is the only one that is reliable enough to prevent death when you use Aura Mastery. In raids this will be a must-have. That said, Aura of Mercy is a direct increase in HPS. With it you can pad the healing meters like a boss, as it does an unbelievably high percentage of all healing done for just a passive heal. However, the minuscule healing every second it does isn't as reliable as a damage decrease from Devotion Aura, and I don't see it ever being used in raids instead of Devotion, unless you have more than one Paladin. Sacrifice Aura is just too risky and unpredictable, especially in raids, as it will direct damage from all nearby allies. That means that you will be at 75% of HP really often, and any ability that does huge damage and is unavoidable, or two small ones, or even something avoidable that you just missed, could kill you instead of leaving you on low HP. There are so many situations where you might get killed just because of this one passive, and because of that, in my opinion, it's not worth taking. Of course, it is only worth taking if you need an extra boost to your AoE healing. I doubt that most paladins will ever consider this aura, but I can see situations where it can shine, especially if you go the AoE route in the artifact talents. Those situations, however, are really far apart. All in all, if you have only one paladin in your raid, Aura Mastery of Devotion is a must. And for everything else outside of raiding, it's still the best. Just remember that you have to stay really close to everyone to actually gain the benefit without the Aura Mastery. With two paladins, you can experiment as much as you want, as long as one of those paladins has Devotion Aura, as it always has been better to ignore damage than to heal it, in this case with Aura of Mercy. The next tier really depends on the first. With Crusader's Might, Divine Purpose is godly, as long as you have the global cooldowns to use Crusader Strike often. And obviously, Holy Avenger is just another cooldown you can use. Holy Prism is nerfed a lot. I see on most written guides that it is a preferred choice for some reason, but it does only 200% of your spell power to heal 5 targets. Just for a comparison, Light of Dawn does 180% of the spell power and heals 5 targets as well, but has a 12-second cooldown instead of the 20, and the cooldown can be reduced, and it can proc, and it has a lot of passives in the artifact tree to buff it. The only thing Holy Prison does now is just be an extra Light of Dawn every 20 seconds, and a nerfed one at that. In Warlords it was incredibly useful, as it was the only AoE that was worth casting. Now we have some options, and it isn't as good of a heal as it was, so I really don't get why people would advocate for it. If you are going for the melee build, go with Divine Purpose, and if you are going for the ranged build, go with Holy Avenger. It's that simple. Even in dungeons, where logically Prism would be the go-to because of the 5 targets, it just heals for next to nothing, comparably. Finally, you should go for Sanctified Wrath. It is just the best out of the 3 for dungeons and raids alike. You could argue that Judgement of Flight is viable for its sustained and low mana cost healing. However, the change from Warlords is that you need Avenging Wrath a lot more, or should I say the spec is focused more around it. And now you can't nerf wings with a glyph as you would in Warlords, so it does a huge amount of extra healing. If you remember the glyph, it reduced the healing but gave you larger duration. So the spec seems to be largely dependent on wings to do well. Again, it was always like that. It is our ultimate after all, but as it is the start of the expansion, it is more relevant than ever, so logically giving it an extra 50% duration and making Holy Shock 50% more frequently used is much more beneficial than a small overtime heal. With the artifact traits and the route you take, you can really screw up at the beginning. It will take everyone roughly 2 or 3 months or maybe more to fill out the passives, so it's no small commitment. Especially at later levels when the respec costs as much as the next rank, and that's like a huge amount of artifact power. And when it takes you a few days or a week to get that artifact power for the next rank, you aren't going to be happy to spend it on a respec. So do it correctly at the start, or if you already went the wrong way, respec now while it's cheap. Anyway, there are 3 routes you could take at the moment. There is the AoE route, which buffs your Light of Dawn and Aura Mastery. This is obviously for the most optimal raid healing and utility Holy Pally, and this is the one I went for, even though the first 3 weeks of Legion are just dungeon farming. So this route isn't really useful for dungeons. You can go straight to the light saves for some extra tank healing, buffing 3 important spells along the way, Light of Dawn, Holy Shock and Sacrifice, or you can go for the most interesting and gameplay changing passive, Power of the Silver Hand. I tried it in beta and it was really fun to monitor and plan your spell priority around it. Of course you can ignore it, but it is really fun when you don't. After the first big passive you go for, it will be harder and harder to progress to the next one, as each level costs 10k or later 100k or later even more. So choosing that second path to the second big passive is difficult. In any case, you have a choice of tank healing and buffing, AoE healing and buffing, or single target healing and gameplay changing. I personally would go for the AoE and single target, however I already went for the tank healing after AoE, so that's a missed opportunity, at least for the type of gameplay I'm going to be pursuing. Now, speaking of gameplay, let's just quickly look how it all works together. A few mythic boss fights will be in the background while we look at the 2 builds for dungeons. First is the AoE Bacon. Your main healing is coming from that spell, as you don't have your 2 main healing abilities as often, meaning Holy Shock and Light of Dawn, because you didn't spec into Crusader's Might. So you should always keep the combo in mind as the most viable and reliable heal. So again, the combo is Bestow Faith on the most injured player, casting Flash of Light ideally with the proc from Holy Shock, and spam the bacon while casting. Now, outside of that, your sustained healing is going to come from keeping Holy Shock and Light of Dawn on cooldown and using Bestow Faith and Flash of Light. Remember, mana isn't a concern in dungeons. The greatest stabilizer is the artifact ability, and when combined with the AoE Bacon, it does insane AoE healing over 10 seconds. Rule of Law is really useful and you should use it often for the extra healing from your mastery and to reach faraway people, especially with Light of Dawn, which has a low range. Of course, pop your CDs accordingly and everything should be fine. The last thing to note is Light of the Martyr. As I said at the beginning of this video, we have a few reliable spells. And in this build especially, Light of the Martyr does the most healing while not having a cooldown. And without Avenging Wrath, it costs a really small portion of your HP, because they kinda went around these kinds of sacrifice spells by giving you more HP than other classes. Now, the other build is the melee one with Crusader Strike. As I mentioned, this was my default build for a long time, especially in the beta. However, I do stray away from it now at launch, as most things that hit me tend to kill me because of the low gear and the way that the dungeons are set up now. So say that you are required to be in melee range of the boss or some adds for at least a portion of the fight, and are required to heal the entire fight. Then the problem comes in the form of movement. You are a healer, and a lot of your heals are castable, so you will inevitably get caught casting when you need to move. And it's not like a DPS, a ranged DPS, when they get caught casting with some AoE or another. One casted DPS spell isn't as important as a single heal. Not to say that that won't happen to you while you are in ranged, but it happens to you quite a lot more in the melee, as they are usually required to move constantly, and they can do so because all melee are designed that way, while you can't. But of course you can just focus on the insta casts and only cast when you are really sure you can pull it off. So this gameplay is much simpler in rotation, but much harder to consistently heal, as you are dependent on procs and are hindered by global cooldowns from Crusader Strike. Just keep casting those Holy Shocks and Light of Dawns and refreshing them with Crusader Strikes. The proximity to the tank is welcome, as you can easily use the artifact ability to heal him and other melee, and with Sanctified Wrath, your Holy Shock with Wings has a 1 second cooldown if we count the Crusader Strike global cooldown in between the Holy Shocks. And as you use the Rule of Law to reach melee in the prior build, now you use it to reach the ranged. The group will also benefit a lot more from your auras, especially if there are more melee than ranged, as you are close to them all the time. So those are the two main builds. All of the talents that go into them are meant to be part of those builds. Like, the talents are really connected. That means that there isn't much deviation to be had in these builds specifically. At least not for dungeons. However, the perfect tier to experiment with is the Aura tier, and to some extent the level 15 and 75 ones. As for raids, the melee build will be viable for some bosses, but for the majority of them a completely new build will emerge, out of necessity. That is the standard Holy Paladin build. Going for Light Scammer for the reliable AoE healing, Rule of Law for reliable healing in general, Devotion Aura as the go-to raid cooldown, Holy Avenger for the extra personal city, Sanctified Wrath as it is incredibly good, and Beacon of the Lightbringer. Now, Lightbringer will allow you to heal basically everyone in the raid with a certain percentage of the healing increase from your mastery, and that is, for me at least, a sad thing. Way back in alpha I noticed this talent and I saw how it can destroy the whole concept of this spec, and I thought it would be removed or changed, but it didn't. It gives people the opportunity to go to the way things were. Even if this ends up being the most valuable build, and I think it will, I certainly won't be using it. Lastly, I'll put a few macros you can use in the description below for the melee build. They just make it possible for you to use Crusader Strike and Judgement on your targets if they are hostile, so that you don't have to change targets in order to reduce the cooldowns of your spells. That just helps you not waste a lot of time switching between targets. Anyway, that is all I figured out so far. As it is the start of the expansion, there will most likely be things I missed out on, so write in the comments what it was I missed, so that people don't get the wrong information. Also write in the comments if you would like to see more guides like this one for other specs and classes, and I will do them after I come back from my holiday in Greece on the 21st of September. Until then, see ya and thanks for watching.